What's up guys, Technic here, and today's video is gonna be mad. It is gonna be so ridiculously detailed. So yes, kickstarting things off with the fact that the Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra released last year as probably the best smartphone of the year, if not of all time, and it released a year and 3 months ago in April 2021 and has only just now been replaced by this, which is our main talking point today, the Xiaomi 12S Ultra. Now I mentioned the gap in release dates because I honestly feel that flagship phones get replaced far too quickly these days, so it's nice to know that you are probably getting more of your money's worth with Xiaomi's ultimate device. That is only if their next Ultra only released at the end of next year, which is slightly doubtful. Speaking of nice things, the new Xiaomi 12S Ultra is literally the exact same price as the Mi 11 Ultra, which released way back when. And I'm sure by now you have already heard your fair share about Xiaomi's new beast. But before we get into the most detailed review about it ever, I do have 3 things to share with you guys. 1. This device will not be making its way to the global market, so if you want one, you'll have to import it. 2. Last year's Mi 11 Ultra had a very good camera system. So good in fact that Xiaomi have reused the ultra-wide and periscope sensor in the new 12S Ultra. But the biggest thing about last year's model was the rear display, which Xiaomi have ditched this time round. And 3, the biggest incentive about this new Xiaomi 12S Ultra is its new 1-inch Sony IMX989 main camera sensor. It's the first time this sensor is being used, and it was literally made for smartphones instead of repurposing an existing 1-inch sensor. So it's Xiaomi's first 1-inch sensor smartphone, which means we're gonna have to seriously deep dive into all the camera capabilities this guy is capable of. So why not do a seriously in-depth comparison in terms of camera against 2 of the best smartphone cameras around, which I actually think they're the 2 best around. Of course, we are going to need to be reviewing other aspects of the phone, such as the battery and the chipset and all that jazz, which we are going to for sure be getting into right now. This is Technic, and this is my extremely detailed full review of the Xiaomi 12S Ultra. The Xiaomi 12S Ultra comes in 2 main color variants. You can pick it up in classic black or the color version that I have with me here today, known as verdant green. It looks fairly different to what we saw with last year's Mi 11 Ultra. I mean, this is a matte finished vegan leather back design, and yes, it is inspired by Leica themselves. Kind of gives you that extra grip that you would usually get on a camera smartphone, but obviously the Mi 11 Ultra did have a ceramic back, which some would say is better. Nevertheless, we have a 4860 mAh battery, and this time around we are treated to Xiaomi's Surge G1 battery chip, which is there for endurance, though it is a smaller capacity than last year's Mi 11 Ultra's 5000 mAh cell. It is larger than the Xiaomi 12 Pro cell. We have 67 watt wide charging, and yes, the brick does come bundled in the box, which is great. What's not great, however, is the fact that it is the same 67 watt wide charging that we saw on the Mi 11 Ultra, which debuted a year and 3 months ago, so charging hasn't improved since then on the Ultra device, though on the Pro model that we saw earlier on this year had 120 watt charging, so would it be nice to see 120 watt charging on here. What is nice to see though is that we do have the same Surge P1 charging chip that we saw in the earlier models Xiaomi 12 Pro, which is good to prevent overcharging. We also have 50 watt wireless charging, which is actually a bit of a letdown considering that last year's Mi 11 Ultra was actually 67 watt wireless charging, but it does match the 50 watt wireless charging that we saw on the Xiaomi 12 Pro earlier on this year. And once again, we do have 10 watt reverse wireless charging, which is exactly the same as what we saw on the Mi 11 Ultra and Xiaomi 12 Pro. Of course, this guy is packed with the latest and greatest chipset from Qualcomm, that being the Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chipset, which does have an integrated GPU, that being the same as the vanilla 8 Gen 1 chipset, being the Adreno 730 GPU. We also have LPDDR5 RAM in this guy, as well as UFS 3.1 storage, and we do have a new 3D liquid cool mechanism. Not to mention we also have 5G, Wi-Fi 6E, Bluetooth 5.2, and NFC. The front is once again protected by Gorilla Glass Victus. The back this time is no longer ceramic, but rather vegan leather, which looks stunning, but probably not as protective. We do have a metal and glass camera module, however, as well as aluminum frame. frames. It does have an IP68 dust and water certification, which is fantastic. I mean, the Mi 11 Ultra did have it, but the Xiaomi 12 Pro that we saw earlier on this year lacked the certification, so it's good to see it back and return to Xiaomi's ultimate flagship. This phone is 9.06 millimeters thick, which is quite a bit thicker than last year's Mi 11 Ultra's 8.4 millimeters, so I guess it is a little bit thicker, though it is not quite as heavy. It's 225 grams in weight as opposed to the Mi 11 Ultra's 234 grams in weight. So it's still a chunky boy, but probably not as chunky and as heavy as last year's model. But the best thing about this phone is no doubt the camera module at the back, which looks the part, and it houses a 48 megapixel IMX586 ultra wide sensor, as well as the same sensor IMX586 48 megapixel 120 millimeter periscope telephoto sensor, both the same that we saw in the Mi 11 Ultra. What has changed, however, is that we now have the brand new 50.33 megapixel IMX9891 1-inch sensor. So it's going to be interesting to see how it stacks up against some of the best camera sensors in smartphones to date. The 48 megapixel ultra wide looks absolutely fantastic. Binning it down 4:1. Binning looks even better thanks to AI. The 50 megapixel main sensor is the 1-inch sensor. It looks great both in binned mode and not in binned mode. 2x digital zoom on that 1-inch sensor looks great too. 48 megapixel periscope at 5x optical looks great. Once again, you can bin it down to 12 megapixels for a little bit of extra depth here. We do have 10x hybrid zoom as well as 30x digital, 50x digital zoom, and we can go all the way up to and surpassing 100x digital zoom to the max being 120x, which still kind of looks visible. We'll see how this compares very soon. When we come close and personal to a subject, the macro mode does not do a good job with the main or the ultra wide sensor, but taking a portrait shot of myself with the main over here, switching to portrait looks fantastic. A lot more dynamic range over there. Very, very good draw distance between the subject and the lens, and blurring the background. There is no edge detection, though we do have a couple portrait modes that are a bit questionable. We also have a couple Leica branded modes, Leica filter modes. Here is Vivid. We do have Natural, which looks more natural, I guess you could say. We have Black and White Natural, as well as Black and White High Contrast, and that's my favorite one. We do have Leica Vibrant as well as Leica Authentic, and now you actually have to choose one of these whenever you take photos. You can't turn it off. The Vibrant looks great. The Authentic kind of looks like it has a bit of vignette going around the corners of the screen. It does look a lot more natural to the eye, though I think that the Vibrant one is targeted more to regular smartphone users. Comparing it to the iPhone and the Samsung, it looks absolutely fantastic. It really finds a nice balance between the saturated Samsung colors, the neutral and natural iPhone colors, and kind of finds a really good middle ground. I really love it, and it really has a shallow depth of field, which is fantastic. Now, switching to the ultra wide cams on all of them and zooming in, it doesn't do as good a job as the Samsung when it zooms in. I would say arguably better than that of the iPhone, and the iPhone can do up to only 15x digital zoom, whereas the Xiaomi 12S Ultra can go up to 120x. The Samsung can go up to 100x, and by zooming into 30 and 50 and 100 times over here, you can see that the Samsung just retains so much more detail, and the 120 times zoom mode on the Xiaomi is not really the best. We do have 8K 24 FPS video mode using the ultra wide camera on the Xiaomi 12S Ultra. The ultra wide, that is mental. You can also do 4K 60 FPS on the ultra wide, which is also something you don't really see very often. Usually when you switch to ultra wide, it drops down to 30 FPS. 8K 24 FPS using the main when recording video looks fantastic, and the stabilization is incredibly good even at 8K. 4K 60 FPS using the main, even better stabilization over here. It is so ridiculously smooth. The ground that I'm walking on is not perfect. What is not smooth, however, is recording 8K 24 using the periscope, but the fact that you can record 8K video using the periscope is mental. 4K 60 FPS using the periscope as well. Once again, quite jittery. I wouldn't recommend it unless you're standing dead still. Now we can zoom in with 8K between 1 and 6x using digital zoom on the main camera sensor. It does an okay job. You can do the same with 4K 60 FPS, but the real sweet spot over here is the fact that you can actually zoom in when set to 4K 30 FPS mode. You can't do it at 60 or 8K. You can zoom in from 0.5 times ultra wide to 15 times. The only thing is that you can see how I'm focusing on my subject over here, that being the duck. Now, when I actually show you the result over here, I was focusing on the big duck on the right hand side there, but when I get to my end product, he is completely cut out over there, and that is because the viewfinder, well, the display of the Xiaomi is showing the main camera zoom. It's not showing the periscope, even though it's flicking between different sensors. From ultra wide to main to periscope, it's still only showing the main sensor all the time, which is a bit weird. Now, comparing the video quality to that of the iPhone and Samsung, the Xiaomi is the only one that can do 8K ultra wide. So, I mean, period over there. That is insane. 4K 60 FPS ultra wide across the board on all of them. I actually think Xiaomi are finally neck and neck with the best video camera smartphones. 8K 24 FPS using the main compared to the Samsung. The Samsung has a heavy crop-in factor when doing 8K, and the iPhone can't even do 8K. So a big win and thumbs up here for Xiaomi. 4K 60 FPS main over here. I actually think that the Xiaomi is almost the smoothest. It's almost the most natural. It looks so crispy clear, but the iPhone is still the king of video for me. Now, night mode off, night mode on with the ultra wide, night mode off, night mode on with the main. You can see there is a big difference with the night mode on, even at 2x digital. When you go to 5x optical, the periscope's not used with night mode off, but it is with night mode on. 10x is the max that we could do with night mode. It does a decent job. 30x we can continue going up all the way to 120x zoom over here, but there are no night mode options for these zoom levels. It doesn't do the best job when you're zooming in by 120x at night, but I mean, you wouldn't exactly expect that. We do have the main photo getting taken here, as well as portrait at night. It doesn't do the best job, and 2x portrait does an okay job. Switching to ultra wide over here when you get close up and personal to a subject, but when you flick to portrait mode, it doesn't do that. Night mode off in a restaurant over here and night mode on. You can see it really does control light a lot better, which I like a lot. Same thing that you can see inside the restaurant over here. Look at the light bulb at the top of the ceiling over there. It really does know how to control the light. We also have Leica vibrant mode over here, switching to authentic, not night mode on, nothing to do with night mode. You can see how much dimmer it gets when you throw in authentic. It kind of darkens the scene, but it actually shows you a lot more natural colors even when you're taking photos of food. I really do like that you have the option to do something completely different to other smartphones. Now, night mode off on all three devices here, night mode on, you can see the Samsung's brightening up the most. iPhone has the most amount of detail over here. Taking a photo of my beer over here with night mode on. They all kind of dim, but the iPhone really has a good balance of night mode on and off. Where it lags behind is when comparing to the Xiaomi and the Samsung when taking a photo of the candle over there, or any light for that matter. The Xiaomi and Samsung always seem to control the light a lot better. The Xiaomi especially, thanks to that 1-inch sensor size over here. Taking a photo here, the Xiaomi just knows what it's doing in terms of light reproduction, which is great. Taking a portrait shot of me, however, I don't think the Xiaomi is the best over here, but it does still look a lot more natural than previous Xiaomi devices. Now, switching from ultra wide night off to night on looks fantastic. Same with the main sensor over here. All of them look great, but I feel that the night mode option, when you start to zoom in on the Xiaomi, isn't as noticeable as the other two, but that's because there's so much light shooting into the sensor anyway. It does such a fantastic job, but it really does show the color accuracy a lot more and how it controls light a lot better when night mode does kick in thanks to AI. We do have 8K 24 FPS using ultra wide at night. It does an okay job. I mean, it's 8K footage at night and it looks as good as this. 4K 30 FPS ultra wide. The reason why I threw 30 FPS in here is because 30 FPS does brighten up the shot a lot more at 4K, as you can see comparing it to 4K 60, which is the max FPS that you could do at 4K. It's a lot smoother, but it's a lot more dim. 8K 24 using the main sensor looks better than I've seen any other phone look at 8K at night. It's ridiculous and it's so stable. I love this phone for its camera. 4K 30 FPS main, once again using 30 FPS so that we can see the brightness levels when comparing it to 4K 60. As you can see over here, a little bit more dim, but I actually prefer this look. I like night videos and night photos still looking like it's nighttime, but giving it a bit of a crisp to it. 1080p 30 FPS is the only option that you have when you actually toggle on the night video mode. Doesn't make the biggest difference if you ask me. It does brighten things up, but it does start to lose a little bit of the detail. Of course, because it's at 1080p, but also because it's really trying to brighten up those details a bit too much. Now, 4K 30 FPS across the board here, comparing all three devices with ultra wide. The Xiaomi is a lot wonkier when recording at night for some reason. The other two do look a bit better. 4K 30 FPS using the main sensor over here, the 1-inch sensor size. I actually think the Xiaomi is the brightest of the three over here, and it's nice and stable as well. And we do have that 1080p 30 FPS night mode option on the Xiaomi. I would honestly stick to the 4K 30 FPS mode. I don't think Xiaomi's night video is their strong suit. The camera sensors on the back of the Xiaomi 12S Ultra are absolutely phenomenal. They take incredible photos and videos regardless of the sensor being used. Don't get me wrong, they are reusing the exact same ultra wide and telephoto sensor that they used in last year's model, so that's a bit of a bummer, but you're getting that new IMX989 1-inch sensor from Sony, which has never been put into a smartphone. It's never been put into anything. It was built for this phone in mind, and it does a fantastic job. The only gripe that I have about it is that it's not as consistent as that of the iPhone or the Samsung. Mainly the iPhone. The iPhone is always consistent. So you might get a bad shot here and there, but if you are a smartphone enthusiast, if you're a camera enthusiast and you really just take that extra second to get a good shot, I don't really think you're gonna get a better photo than what you're gonna get from the Xiaomi 12S Ultra. On the right side of the device, we do have a power button. Above that, a non-split volume rocker. At the bottom of the phone, we have a dual SIM 5G standby tray. Unfortunately, no expandable storage. We do have a water resistant seal though, thanks to that IP68 water and dust certification. At the bottom, we also have a USB 2.0 Type-C port, however, but we do have dual stereo speakers paired up with Harman Kardon and Dolby Atmos, one at the bottom, one at the top, and of course we have an IR blaster, which Xiaomi just does not want to let up, as well as a 25mm selfie camera. It is 32 megapixels and it is a new OmniVision OV32C sensor. The selfies come out more than decent. I mean, they even have great edge detection when in portrait mode, pretty much perfect edge detection, I guess you could say. The problem is that my skin tone is really washed out. The background's pretty washed out. I've just seen a lot better results from other flagships around. I've even seen better results from other Xiaomi flagships around. It's not the best sensor that they've put in their phone, but it still does a more than decent job, I guess you could say. And when comparing it to that of the iPhone and Samsung, you can see exactly what I mean. I just look like a pale ghost when it comes to the Xiaomi, as opposed to the other two, which are just so vibrant and rich and warm. You want to take a selfie on an iPhone or Samsung when you see what's happening with the Xiaomi selfie sensor over here. But what about video recording? Let's go ahead and give it a look and a listen.
What's up guys, Technic here, recording a selfie video on the brand new Xiaomi 12S Ultra, which is supposed to be the best camera smartphone ever because of its large 1-inch sensor size on the back, but its selfie camera does an okay job, I guess you could say. The biggest downfall is that video, when recording with the Selfie on the world's best camera smartphone, selfie video is capped at 1080p, and get this, 30 frames per second.
So 1080p 30 FPS on the Xiaomi is just not flagship material. 4K 60 is available on the iPhone and the Samsung, but not on the Xiaomi, not on the Ultra device. And while photos at night do come out looking actually probably better than the daytime photos with night mode off or on, portrait mode looks pretty decent too, but edge detection is not the best. And we do have flash that we can use with the portrait mode, no night mode option though. And comparing it to the iPhone and the Samsung at night, the Xiaomi actually does a better job in controlling light, but once again, the photos are just so washed out. It's just so hard to forgive that part of the selfie camera that we're seeing from the Xiaomi here. And videos at night, once again, 1080p 30 FPS is just such a big deal breaker for me if you are a selfie enthusiast, I guess you could say. And you can still record 4K 60 FPS selfie video at night with the Samsung and the iPhone, which is just not there on the Xiaomi. And even the lighting, how the lighting can be controlled, is just done so much better on that of the iPhone. The selfie sensor does a more than decent job, I guess you could say, for a good phone, but this is the ultimate phone. It should have the ultimate selfie sensor. There is an always on display once the phone is on. We also have an under display fingerprint sensor, which is optical. Unfortunately, it is not ultrasonic, despite Samsung going for ultrasonic and iPhone using 3D face unlock, though the Xiaomi is using 2D face unlock with the selfie camera. So there is no true real protection here when it comes to biometric security, though I will forgive it for that since they've been doing it for so long. We do have a 6.73 inch LTPO 2.0 E5 AMOLED display. It is a curved dot display, only dual curved this time. It has 1 billion colors. It is 10-bit. It has 112% DCI-P 3 color gamma rating, 140% sRGB. We also have HDR10 Plus and Dolby Vision certified. Not to mention we have 1500 nits of max brightness. And though we do have a decent screen to body ratio, it is less than the 12 Pro and last year's Mi 11 Ultra. It is still a WQHD plus resolution with 522 pixels per inch. That's fantastic, don't get me wrong, but it is the exact same panel that we saw on the Xiaomi 12 Pro. But I mean, it is still better than last year's Mi 11 Ultra's panel because it uses LTPO 2.0 technology, which means that the display can refresh between 1 and 120 Hz. So it will sit on 1 Hz when the screen is still and 120 when it's in motion, so that you save battery when you're not using it and you use battery when you actually need to use it. It also has 480 Hz touch sampling rates, and yes, we are kitted with MIUI 13 skinned over Android 12, and it is just as well optimized, if well optimized is the thing to say, with MIUI software as we saw with the Xiaomi 12 Pro. And it doesn't do a bad job even with personalization options over here. Much like we've seen from Oppo before, there are loads of different options, which is great. And even though this is a Chinese model and it won't be coming to the global markets, we do still have a whole bunch of Google services over here, including the Play Store. So don't worry about that. Google is fully supported on the device. We do have 12 gigs of LPDDR5 RAM, which can be increased by an additional 3 gigs all the way up to a total of 15 gigs of RAM. But do bear in mind that the additional 3 gigs using RAM extension is extended using the onboard storage and not the actual LPDDR5 RAM modules. Not to mention, we do have the brand new Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chipset, which now has a max core clock speed of 3.19 GHz. It is 10% higher performing in terms of CPU, 10% faster graphics rendering, and it is 30% more efficient across the board. And when pairing that with the high performance mode that we have within the battery settings of the phone, yielded an AnTuTu score of 1,108,976 points, which is the highest I have ever tested or seen, for that matter, on my channel. And when it comes to Geekbench version 5, we got a single core score of 1,332 points and multi-core of, get this, 4,382 points, which is the highest single and multi-core score I have ever seen from a Qualcomm chipset on my channel ever. And in 3D Mark Wildlife, we got a maxed out score, which seems to be the new trend these days for all these new Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 or Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chipsets. But when doing that same test in 4K, that being Wildlife Extreme, we got a score of 2,786 points with an average FPS of 16.7, which has only been beat by one phone out there, that being the Red Magic 7S Pro, and that's because that is a fully fledged gaming smartphone and it only beat it by 0.1 FPS. So for a non-gaming centric device, this phone held up its end when it comes to GPU performance in 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme. So cameras, check. Performance in terms of CPU and benchmarks, check. The only other main category left is gaming. So how does this guy game, since it has a 120 Hz refresh rate panel and yes, a brand new Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chipset. So going ahead and enabling an FPS counter within the developer options of a Xiaomi device, like I've done right now, and hopping into GameSpace, or Game Turbo that is, which is the app that we can use to tweak some settings within games that we play on Xiaomi devices, jump into our first game, that being Genshin Impact over here, and getting into it, we can see that the little Game Turbo overlay does what you would expect it to do. I mean, this is not a gaming device, it still has quite a few little tricks up its sleeve, such as changing the filter as well as high performance mode, which is great, and jumping into the graphics menu of Genshin Impact, making sure everything is set to the highest possible graphics settings. Max FPS, the max FPS of this game is 60, so it's always going to be capping at 60, and we're getting an average FPS on the Xiaomi 12S Ultra of 55, which is fantastic considering the Xiaomi 12 Pro with the vanilla Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chipset got an average of 42 FPS, so it's actually outdone, I guess you could say, its predecessor, streaks ahead of that of the Mi 11 Ultra, of course that is. And moving on to our next game, that being Real Racing 3. Now this does not have an FPS cap, so we should be hitting 120 FPS because we have a 120 Hz refresh rate screen, and on most phones we hit 120, not because of the chipset, but because the phone supports that game's high refresh rate. This is capping it at 60, unfortunately, which is a bit of a bummer for most. But hopping into Bullet Force over here, a first-person shooter game, we are getting that max 120 FPS thanks to the 120 Hz LTPO 2.0 panel and Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chipset. We're getting an average of 121 FPS as opposed to the average of 112 FPS that we got on the Xiaomi 12 Pro, rocking the vanilla Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chipset. So it does game pretty decently, to be honest with you. It sucks that it caps some high refresh rate games, but when it doesn't, it hits the max FPS, and even in graphically demanding games it does a great job too. But what about the audio, since it does have dual stereo speakers kitted with Harman Kardon and Dolby Atmos? The Xiaomi 12S Ultra has literally taken everything that made its predecessor, the Mi 11 Ultra, great, and made all those aspects even better. The one thing that it did change, however, is that rear screen on the back. It's no longer there. They decided to ditch it this time round, which kind of sucks, I guess you could say, but I'm honestly okay with that, since that little tiny rear screen on the back of the Mi 11 Ultra was far from perfect. Instead, they made a phone for the same price, but focused their money on making the most ultimate camera smartphone, and even its look screams professional camera, thanks to the massive ring-like camera module, Leica branding, and grippy vegan leather back, which not only looks classy, but prevents your phone from slipping when you're in the zone taking photos and videos. Speaking of which, the photos and videos that this beast takes come out absolutely phenomenal. The ultra-wide and telephoto shots and videos, for that matter, come out fantastic too. Even though they are reused from last year's Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra, I think they kind of just felt like maybe those sensors were good enough to move on to the next flagship and they could be reused for another generation. And honestly, I'm okay with that because those two sensors are still absolutely fantastic. And I'm okay with that because what they thought needed an upgrade was the main camera. And they have absolutely nailed it with the new 1-inch sensor-sized Sony IMX 989. It takes the best smartphone photos I have ever seen in my entire life. This thing is absolutely amazing. It has perfect shallow depth of field, incredible dynamic range. I'm in love with the photos that this thing takes. But on that note, I do have my fair share of gripes. First off, it is not as consistent as an iPhone. It may take better photos, but now and then you'll take a snap and it's just not perfect. But that's okay for those who are camera enthusiasts, since the pros like to take their time on a shot anyway. Next up, the Leica partnership is a really good look, but there are so many options, it does tend to be a bit overwhelming. But once again, this won't really be an issue for camera enthusiasts. What might be a problem, however, is the fact that you can clearly see that Xiaomi and Leica focused all their energy into the main sensor, meaning that the ultra-wide and telephoto cameras really did take a back seat. Which leads me to my last point, the color accuracy and shot consistency, from the ultra-wide to the main to the periscope, and it is way off. Okay. Now that is out the way, honestly, the main sensor on this phone is incredible. Hyper optical image stabilization is fantastic. Not to mention, you can also record 8K video on all three sensors on this guy. And yes, you can do 4K 60 FPS on all three as well. But, and this is a big but, is it the best video recording smartphone out there as opposed to the likes of the iPhone and the Samsung? I don't really think I want to answer that one. I'm going to leave this one up to you guys, so be sure to let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. So I guess this may very well be the best camera phone of all time, right? Well, if you take the selfie camera into account, then no it's not. Selfies come out a tad washed out, and more importantly, selfie videos are limited to just 1080p resolution and 30 FPS. I mean, come on guys, this is supposed to be the most ultimate camera device ever. The selfie cam is not hidden under the display like the Mix 4, and it is not at the top left corner like the Mi 11 Ultra. It's a punch hole at the top of the center of the screen like the Xiaomi 12 Pro, because just like its little brother, it has the exact same 6.73-inch E5 AMOLED display. And that's a good thing because this screen is gorgeous. It's dual curved, it has a high WQHD+ resolution, and sports LTPO 2.0 technology, which allows the screen to refresh between 1 and 120 Hz. The only real downside with the display this time around is the fact that it only reaches 1500 nits of peak brightness. And I say only, but 1500 nits is mental. But nevertheless, the Xiaomi Mi 11 Ultra of last year could hit 1700 nits of peak brightness. So that's a bit of a bummer. And the other bummer is the fact that its screen to body ratio is slightly lower than that of the Mi 11 Ultra and Xiaomi 12 Pro. Another noteworthy upgrade here is no doubt the inclusion of the new Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chipset. It destroys benchmarks and plays games like an absolute champion, but unfortunately the phone doesn't yet support all games with high refresh rates. The battery has unfortunately dropped to 4,860 milliamps as opposed to last year's Mi 11 Ultra's 5,000 milliamp hour cell. However, it is still larger than the Xiaomi 12 Pro's 4,600 milliamp hour battery. You've also got to remember that this guy is now more efficient thanks to the new Snapdragon chipsets as well as the new Surge G1 chip from Xiaomi, which supposedly endures the battery even more, so it should still last you through more than a day, I guess you could say. And if it does drain down to zero, you do still have pretty fast 67 watt wide charging, though unfortunately that is the same 67 watt wide charging we saw on last year's Mi 11 Ultra and not the wonderful 120 watt wide charging that we saw on earlier this year's Xiaomi 12 Pro. That's a Pro device, this is an Ultra device, and that charges faster than this. Not to mention that when it comes to wireless charging, while it does match the Xiaomi 12 Pro with 50 watt wireless charging, it's unfortunately slower than last year's Mi 11 Ultra's 67 watt wireless charging, though all three do still have 10 watt reverse wireless charging. So let's have a look at what you'd actually be benefiting from if you decide to import the Xiaomi 12S Ultra. A, you'd be paying the same price as you would have for the Mi 11 Ultra, which released a year and 3 months ago, which is a longer gap than most flagships and a cheaper price when compared to the best phones around. B, you'll be getting your hands on one of the first smartphones to run the new Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chipset. And C, probably the biggest incentive, you'll have arguably the largest and best main camera sensor ever put into a smartphone. So if you want bragging rights, go out and buy yourself a brand new Xiaomi 12S Ultra. I honestly wouldn't blame you. This is like the most ultra device ever. But if you aren't exactly a smartphone performance or camera enthusiast, then you might be better suited purchasing something like a Xiaomi 12 Pro or even last year's Mi 11 Ultra, and it will probably land up saving you quite a bit of cash too. So I hope that you guys enjoyed watching this video as much as I'm gonna personally be flexing with my brand new Xiaomi 12S Ultra. This is Tech Nick, and I'll catch you in the next one.